Hey, you know, I'm not exactly the world's biggest nationalist. I do not shag the flag, but every now and then I really just can't help but stop and enjoy a bit of the old common Scottish W. And on December 22nd, 2022, after 6 years of tireless campaigning from activists, the Scottish Parliament passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, delivering a burgeoning L to the trans medicalist community and other such anti-trans groups. How so? Well, in order to get legal recognition, trans people in Scotland used to have to go by the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. They would have needed a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, to have lived in line with their gender, essentially social transition, for a minimum of 2 years, and to be at least 18 years old. Now, the requirements for legal recognition can be a lot worse than this. In 2017, the European Court of Human Rights made a move to change gender recognition laws in at least 22 countries because they were still requiring people to show proof of genital surgery before they could legally transition. Because it's, an insanely invasive, batshit human rights abuse. That said, the UK still has its problems. With each application having to be reviewed by a panel of professionals, the need for a gender dysphoria diagnosis plus 2 years of documented social transition, you can see how that does mean quite a lot of work for healthcare professionals and really just an unnecessary strain on the NHS as a whole. The procedure is such a pain in the ass that only 5,000 people in the UK have received gender recognition certificates, and that's since the law was passed almost 20 years ago. And given the current population of trans people in the UK, you could say that needs some improvement. By contrast, the new law in Scotland removes the requirement for a gender dysphoria diagnosis, reduces the social transition period down to 3 months, and reduces the minimum applicant age to 16. So from a progressive stance, that seems kind of harmless, right? Trans people get to enjoy a bit more dignity in their lives, and a bureaucratic weight is lifted from an already struggling healthcare system. Given that Portugal, Ireland, and Norway have also taken their own gender recognition Ws in the last few years without any issues, it's hard to imagine why anyone would take issue with this one. Well, as you might expect, British TERFs are not known for taking their Ls quietly. As the new law was passed, one protester gave an impassioned screed and then lifted up her skirt, revealing a pubic wig, and screaming, "If you will not be decent, then I will be indecent." Then adding, "If you think that's the first time there will be a minge out, you're wrong." Oh god. And she wasn't alone. The bill itself had been held up by over 150 proposed amendments from the Conservative Party, and according to this article in The Times, critics argue the bill will fundamentally alter who can access women-only services and leave them vulnerable to abuse by predator male offenders. Now, I have some problems with the way The Times presented that argument, but we'll come back to that. First, I might as well play ball and address the critics. So if you're the kind of person who has concerns about people who identify as women getting their junk out in public spaces, you think people probably shouldn't do that, well, don't worry, because I have a video for you. It's this one. So, the week before this bill was passed, known politics understander and definite disliker of bigotry, J.K. Rowling, described the bill as Nicola Sturgeon's poll tax. Because, using Scotland as a test monkey for an extortionate flat tax will definitely affect the polls in the same way as making it easier for trans people to change the gender on their documents. Yeah, any day now. And as a classic L connoisseur, Joanne wasn't finished there. In response to the bill passing, she tried to claim a kind of commisatory W for her team by opening a crisis centre for women in the Lothians area which excludes trans women. Holy fuck, Joanne. Guess you can't fault her for a lack of trying. Now, it is perfectly legal for her to do this under the Equality Act, and given the unfortunate state of crisis services in the country, this has been welcomed by professionals as a kind of better than nothing, I suppose. But they have found it puzzling that she felt the need to do this. As the chief executive of Crisis Scotland put it, every crisis centre in the country currently offers support to trans women, and this has been the case for 15 years. And in all that time, maybe we should take a guess at how many incidents there have been of this being abused. Fucking hell, Loan. Okay, let's see if we have any other concerns. Now, despite the gender recognition W in Scotland, there is still always that potential backlash from our imperial masters over in Westminster. At the beginning of this year, Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Minister for Women and Equalities, made an announcement which strongly implied that Scottish certificates would become invalid in the rest of the UK. The government already has its own list of countries that they accept gender certificates from, but this typically excludes countries that don't require a medical diagnosis. So why is she pursuing this potential true scum W? I'm sure there are plenty of reasons, but one that most likely sticks out for this particular person is bathrooms. That's because Kemi is fairly well known for her culture war stunts, one of which was at a campaign event where she added makeshift men and ladies signs to the doors of 2 unisex bathrooms. Which looked like this, by the way. Not exactly the next Martin Luther here, am I right, boys? Of course, despite the complaints of TERF Twitter, gender recognition certificates have nothing to do with bathrooms. Because believe it or not, people in the UK have never been required to produce documents before entering a bathroom. Like, it's really hard to believe how people can still drum up concerns about this one. Let's put it this way. If you are a bad dude and you decide that you want to assault someone in the women's bathroom, well, the law hasn't stopped you, so why the fuck would this? I'm sorry, but bathroom signs are not these fucking force fields that predators just bounce off of like some kind of sci-fi cock-blocking mechanism. But, you know, as someone who's had to have this conversation a strange amount of times, a really good question to ask someone, especially if they think bathrooms should just be for people based on their biological sex, is how would you enforce that? Because the unavoidable answer is the only way you could ever enforce something like that would be if someone was at the door doing genital checks. That, and you'd also have to be okay with trans men using the women's bathroom, which, you know, sometimes looks like this. If you disagree, you're wrong. Sorry. Big conservative L for Lemmy Badenoch. Okay, let's try one more of these. Coming back to our famous fanny flasher here, maybe we can listen to what exactly she had to say.
If this Parliament will not respect the rights of women, then you have no decency. And if you will not be decent towards women who are being right now in jails that you're in charge of, if you will not be decent, then I will be indecent. Get it right up, you!
Right, so at least part of what she said there was kind of true. It is true that cis women have been assaulted by trans women in British prisons. A grand total of 7 times in the space of 8 years. To put that into perspective, 11 trans prisoners were assaulted in English and Welsh jails in just the year 2019 alone. Without getting too graphic, there's this article about a trans woman who was assaulted over 2,000 times in 4 years in a male prison, where she was also denied hormones. In fact, she was forced to be in that prison not because she lacked a GRC, but because she hadn't had reassignment surgery. You can find higher numbers of sexual offences from individual prison guards in the UK, one example being this guy who was jailed for 6 years after demanding sexual favours from 12 inmates in return for cell privileges. At least for organisations who actually sincerely care about women's safety, the behaviour of male prison guards in general is a much more pressing issue. But maybe you're more of the one is still too many persuasion, and okay, that's not exactly how systemic issues work, but maybe I can humour you. Maybe there is a conversation to be had about how we should approach trans people in prisons. For one, I definitely don't know where I stand on putting trans men in male prisons, especially if they're quite early on in their transition. That's a hard question. The problem is that whilst this walloper convinces herself that she needs to flash her fanny in a room full of strangers in order to be heard, the British government is already addressing her concerns. The first unit for trans inmates in the UK was opened in 2019, but all the same, none of this has anything to do with the Gender Recognition Act. Actually, none of these examples do. What this really is a proxy issue. And you might have varying opinions on why gender-critical people do this. Maybe you think it's just an irrational fear born out of misinformation. Maybe you buy this idea that quite a lot of TERFs are victims of male violence and patriarchy who have just chosen to process that trauma in the worst possible way. But either way, the result is the same. What you end up with is a fairly inoffensive bill which really does little more than just make trans people's lives a wee bit easier, being attacked for absolutely no reason. Essentially, you have a group of people who are so threatened by trans people, well, mostly trans women, that they end up attacking them even on issues that have nothing to do with what they're supposedly concerned about. The reason I found the discourse around this law so interesting is because it's like the perfect example of people behaving like the epitome of a hate group. Like, it has everything. It's bigots framing their aggression as an act of defense. It's the blatant use of proxy issues where you end up attacking a group just for its own sake. It's trying to hold up what was essentially just a basic improvement in human rights for reasons that had nothing to do with the law itself. And regardless of what's really going on inside their heads, no matter how much they try to dress it up, the message they're putting out is one of hate. And when J.K. Rowling opens her trans exclusionary radical women's shelter despite there being no issues with the current arrangement in the last 15 years, the implicit message is, I don't care about the truth. I'm going to treat trans people as a threat, regardless. And that's just a, how do I end this? It's a huge L. If you like this video and you want to tell me how much you like it through the sweet language of money, consider supporting me on Patreon. You'll get early access to my videos, access to the music I make for those videos, and you can have your name scrolling past in the credits with all these other ones. Who doesn't want that, am I right? Go there now. Why are you still here? Fucking idiot. Prick. Okay, bye.